Hello, and welcome to The Bard's Truth with your host, the Green Bard. This is episode 2.3 of the Direwolves of Winterfell, a storm of swords, an isolated Grey Wind, and a married Robb. In this volume, we see how the main themes of the wolf bond can be undermined, the disastrous consequences of Robb isolating himself from the wolf and then ignoring Grey Wind up to the end should be a warning to all the other Stark children about the importance of heeding their wolves' warnings. Unfortunately, none of them are aware of the lesson given Robb's distance from all of them. History may be doomed to repeat itself. A Storm of Swords, Bran 1. The direwolves may have some notion of Grey Wind's isolation from Robb, though, because they each share a pack bond as well as the bond to their Stark. We show this with Summer remembering his entire pack, including Grey Wind. Since we have no POV for Grey Wind, I include this passage to remind us of the type of thoughts Grey Wind must be having. He is most similar to Summer in looks, and, importantly, they have the same eye color, shared with Nymeria and Lady. He had a pack as well once. 5 they had been, and a 6th who stood aside. Somewhere down inside him were the sounds the men had given them to tell one from the other. But it was not by their sounds he knew them. He remembered their scents, his brothers and sisters. They all had smelled alike, had smelled of pack, but each was different too. Later. Sometimes he could sense them, though, as if they were still with him. Only hidden from sight by a boulder or a stand of trees. He could not smell them, nor hear their howls at night, yet he felt their presence at his back. All but the sister they had lost. His tail drooped when he remembered her. 4 now, not 5. 4 and one more. The white who has no voice. A Storm of Swords, Catelyn 2. When Robb returns to Riverrun, Catelyn at first assumes Grey Wind will always be with him as before. Soon, though, it's clear something's wrong. The wolf is no longer Robb's constant companion. Grey Wind's isolation from Robb is constant for much of this volume.
Her son had returned to Riverrun, and Grey Wind with him. Only the son of the great Grey Direwolf could send the hounds into such a frenzy of baying and barking.
Later.
It was only then that Catelyn realized what was amiss. The wolf. The wolf is not here. Where is Grey Wind? She knew the direwolf had returned with Robb. She had heard the dogs, but he is not in the hall, not at her son's side where he belonged.
Catelyn, knowing firsthand the protective nature of the direwolves, challenges Robb on this, but as in so many of his prior decisions, some good and some poor, he dismisses her concern. The stubbornness that was mentioned early in the story is front and center here.
As they started up the steps, Catelyn asked the question that had been troubling her since she entered the hall. Robb, where is Grey Wind? In the yard, with a haunch of mutton. I told the kennel master to see that he was fed. You always kept him with you before. A hall is no place for a wolf. He gets restless, you've seen, growling and snapping. I should never have taken him into battle with me. He's killed too many men to fear them now. Jane's anxious around him, and he terrifies her mother. And there's the heart of it, Catelyn thought. He is part of you, Robb. To fear him is to fear you. I am not a wolf, no matter what they call me. Robb sounded cross. Grey Wind killed a man at the crag, another at Ashmark, and 6 or 7 at Oxcross. If you had seen... I saw Bran's wolf tear out a man's throat at Winterfell, she said sharply, and loved him for it. That's different. The man at the crag was a knight Jane had known all her life. You can't blame her for being afraid. Grey Wind doesn't like her uncle either. He bares his teeth every time Sir Rolf comes near him. A chill went through her. Send Sir Rolf away, at once. Robb! She stopped and held his arm. I told you once to keep Theon Greyjoy close, and you did not listen. Listen now. Send this man away. I am not saying you must banish him. Find some task that requires a man of courage, some honorable duty, what it matters not, but do not keep him near you. He frowned. Should I have Grey Wind sniff all my nights? There might be others whose smell he mislikes. Any man Grey Wind mislikes is a man I do not want close to you. These wolves are more than wolves, Robb. You must know that. I think perhaps the gods sent them to us. Your father's gods, the old gods of the north. 5 wolf pups, Robb? 5 for 5 Stark children?
Let's focus on that last bit. Any man Grey Wind mislikes is a man I do not want close to you. If only that advice were taken as a rule this entire volume, and in future for the other Starks. Unfortunately, we know that doesn't happen. Rip. Robb does send Rolf Spicer away, but it's apparent he doesn't take the advice to heart. As Grey Wind, Robb's shadow remains isolated from him. Catelyn clearly takes this advice to heart in the Nunts, and it creeps into her thoughts in many ways, even when she laments that Robb married Jane instead of Marjorie.
If you had to fall into a woman's arms, my son, why couldn't they have been Marjorie Tyrell's? The wealth and power of Highgarden could have made all the difference in the fighting yet to come. And perhaps Grey Wind would have liked the smell of her as well.
A Storm of Swords, Catelyn 3. The isolation continues in Cat's next chapter. Catelyn and Grey Wind are both despairing, as evidenced by the howling and her ominous thoughts of death and ruin. I do wonder if Grey Wind is also mirroring Robb's mood at this time, with the precarious situation Robb is in with the loss of the Karstark and Frey alliance.
They carried the corpses in upon their shoulders and laid them beneath the days. A silence fell upon the torch-lit hall, and in the quiet Catelyn could hear Grey Wind howling half a castle away. He smells the blood, she thought. Through stone walls and wooden doors, through night and rain, he still knows the scent of death and ruin.
The Karstark debacle is certainly a harbinger of death and ruin. Grey Wind is not even mentioned in the chapter where Lord Rickard is executed. A Storm of Swords, Catelyn 5. In this chapter, hope returns for Robb and Grey Wind's bond, because as they depart for the twins, Grey Wind is again shadowing at Robb's side. He seems a bit suspicious of Jane, but when she leaves, he's satisfied and scouts ahead for danger. Their bond seems to be re-established as in a Game of Thrones. Grey Wind and Robb are affectionate, and they are mirroring each other's emotions again. Robb's leadership also seems in full effect.
All the time the king and queen were talking, Grey Wind prowled around them, stopping only to shake the water from his coat and bare his teeth at the rain. When at last Robb gave Jane one final kiss, dispatched a dozen men to take her back to River Run, and mounted his horse once more, the direwolf raced off ahead as swift as an arrow loosed from a longbow.
Later.
And Grey Wind was at the king's side once more, where he belongs.
Later.
And when you've joined his men to yours, and seen my brother married, what then? Catelyn asked him. North, Robb scratched Grey Wind behind an ear.
Later.
Grey Wind leapt upon King Tristafer's crept, his teeth bared. Robb's own face was cold. That's as cruel as it is unfair. Jon is no Theon.
Later.
I don't have to. I'm the king. Robb turned and walked off, Grey Wind bounding down from the tomb and loping after him.
Later.
In the days that followed, Robb was everywhere and anywhere, riding at the head of the van with the great Jon, scouting with Grey Wind, racing back to Robin Flit in the rear guard. Men said proudly that the young wolf was the first to rise each dawn and the last to sleep each night. But Catelyn wondered whether he was sleeping at all. He grows as lean and hungry as his direwolf.
Still, there is a sour note at the end. Is Robb not sleeping a sign that he is breaking or trying too hard? On the other hand, it is definitely mirroring. They are both exuding a lean and hungry aspect. A Storm of Swords, Catelyn 6. Before they approach the twins, Grey Wind is still shadowing Robb.
There was more than an hour of daylight remaining when he rode up with his column, but Robb called a halt at once, and Sir Reynold Westerling came to escort Catelyn to the king's tent. She found her son seated beside a brazier, a map across his lap. Grey Wind slept at his feet. The great Jon was with him, along with Galbert Glover, Mage Mormont, Edmure, and a man that Catelyn did not know.
Unfortunately, the improvement in Grey Wind's connection to Robb is undermined again when their party comes upon the Freys for the first time. Grey Wind senses danger or malice, but Robb doesn't take heed of the warning. Grey Wind, for his part, doesn't obey Robb for the first time we've seen. This should be a huge red flag, like as big as the ones from the Olympics when the Soviet Union was still together. At least if the size is compared to how many medals they won. Sadly, instead of heeding the dire warning of the dire wolf, Cat and Robb are too worried about offending the Freys. With friends like these. One might take a lesson here on politics. in Westeros and in real life. Keep your own best interests in your sights. Don't try too hard to appease your enemies. Of course, that would necessitate one to first recognize them as anemones. Enemies. Not the fish. You know what I mean. The people you don't like. Either way, Robb was unable to discern this truth. Listening to Grey Wind here would have enabled that. Let me repeat that. Listen to your dire wolf. Should I say it loud enough for Jon at the wall? Here's the passage.
They halted to let their hosts come to them. Robb's banner drooped on its staff, and the steady sound of rainfall mingled with the rush of the swollen green fork on their right. Grey Wind edged forward, tail stiff, watching through slitted eyes of dark gold. When the Freys were a half-dozen yards away, Catelyn heard him growl, a deep rumble that seemed almost one with the rush of the river. Robb looked startled. "Grey Wind, to me, to me." Instead, the direwolf leapt forward, snarling. Sir Rymon's palfrey shied off with a whinny of fear, and Peter Pimples reared and threw him. Only Black Walder kept his mount in hand. He reached for the hilt of the sword. "No!" Robb was shouting. "Grey Wind, here! Here!" Catelyn spurred between the direwolf and the horses. Mud splattered from the hoofs of her mare as she cut in front of Grey Wind. The wolf veered away, and only then seemed to hear Robb calling.
The scene is repeated almost verbatim at the gates to the twins. Again, instead of heeding Grey Wind's warning, Robb practices some politics and denies entry to Reynold Westerling. The tunnel vision here is disheartening. The Starks can't see the warning because they think if they behave perfectly, the Freys will somehow be appeased. Like they'll somehow forget this massive injustice that happened to them. And that Robb is going north and abandoning them right after he makes them his allies again. They'll just kind of forget about that. The Starks can't see this warning, but Walder Frey's also no dummy. You really got to look at it from his perspective. Walder Frey sees Robb as a loser who is being forced to abandon the Riverlands to go home with his tail tucked between his legs. He really had no reason to return to the fold. If he had, all he had to look forward to was the wrath of Tywin Lannister. Under that light, you can almost identify with why he betrayed Robb. He's still a jerk, but you can see what I mean. This was inevitable given the players. Unless Robb had listened to his wolf.
There was more trouble at the gatehouse. Grey Wind balked in the middle of the drawbridge, shook the rain off, and howled at the portcullis. Robb whistled impatiently. "Grey Wind, what is it? Grey Wind, with me." But the direwolf only bared his teeth. He does not like this place, Catelyn thought. Robb had to squat and speak softly to the wolf before he would consent to pass beneath the portcullis. By then, lame Lothar and Walder Rivers had come up. "It's the sound of the water he fears," Rivers said. "Beasts know how to avoid the river in flood." "A dry kennel and a leg of mutton will see him right again," said Lothar cheerfully. "Shall I summon our master of hounds?" "He's a direwolf, not a dog," said Robb, "and dangerous to men he does not trust. Sir Reynold, stay with him. I won't take him into Lord Walder's hall like this." "Deftly done," Catelyn decided. "Robb keeps the Westerling out of Lord Walder's sight as well."
The irony in Cat's politically correct phrase is too thick. Deftly done indeed. To me, the motivation was completely and utterly wrong-headed. We must pause now to consider poor Grey Wind. He is isolated and knows of the danger to his Robb. I can't imagine the anguish. A Storm of Swords, Catelyn 7. Cat laments Grey Wind not being present in the hall just before the Red Wedding ensues. Too late, Cat. You chose to appease the Freys again and rely on guest right instead of remembering that Grey Wind was Robb's most important protector.
The sight of the dogs made Catelyn wish once more for Grey Wind, but Robb's direwolf was nowhere to be seen. Lord Walder had refused to allow him into the hall. "Your wild beast has taste for human flesh, I hear," the old man had said. "Rips out throats, yes. I'll have no such creature at my Roslyn's feast. Amongst women and little ones, all my sweet innocents." "Grey Wind is no danger to them, my lord," Robb protested. "Not as long as I am there. You were there at my gates, were you not? When the wolf attacked the grandsons I sent to greet you. I heard all about that. Don't think I didn't, heh?"
Frey denying the wolf in the hall should have been another huge clue. Grey Wind is no danger for friends. Not so for enemies. Not long after that, the crossbows start thrumming. Cat hears Grey Wind howling. Clearly the wolf sensed this coming. Robb, under the table, is probably linked telepathically to the wolf at this point, and Grey Wind knows exactly what's happening.
Then the tabletop that the small John had flung over Robb had shifted, and her son struggled to his knees. He had an arrow in his side, a second in his leg, a third through his chest. Lord Walder raised a hand, and the music stopped, all but one drum. Catelyn heard the crash of distant battle, and closer the wild howling of a wolf. Grey Wind, she remembered too late. Heh! Lord Walder cackled at Robb.
Later.
Yes, Robb, get up and walk out. Please, please, save yourself. If not for me, for Jane. Jane. Robb grabbed the edge of the table and forced himself to stand. Mother, he said, Grey Wind. Go to him. Now, Robb, walk out of here.
So Robb's last words are Grey Wind, just as Jon's are Ghost in A Dance with Dragons. I think Robb did indeed go to Grey Wind as Cat commanded, just not in the way that she had meant. My assumption is that his consciousness goes on to live his second life inside Grey Wind. A Storm of Swords, Epilogue. Unfortunately, that second life is a short one, and bloody. Stark's direwolf killed 4 of our wolfhounds, and tore the kennel master's arm off his shoulder, even after we'd filled him full of quarrels. Robb/Grey Wind fought to the last, but to no effect. Being penned up in a kennel is no place for a direwolf. Cat and Robb didn't heed Grey Wind's dire warnings, and each paid the ultimate price. A Storm of Swords, Arya 11. Elsewhere, Arya also hears a wolf howling, and it affects her to her core.
Somewhere far off, she heard a wolf howling. It wasn't very loud compared to the camp noise and the music and the low, ominous growl of the river running wild, but she heard it all the same. Only maybe it wasn't her ears that heard it. The sound shivered through Arya like a knife, sharp with rage and grief.
Note how she may have heard Grey Wind, or possibly Nymeria, it isn't really clear, is it, howling in her mind. We do know that Nymeria is not far, given that she found Cat's body later. Either way, it seems clear that Arya felt Grey Wind's desperation, directly or through Nymeria, who would certainly be sensing the peril through the pack bond. But regrettably, they were both too far away to do anything. I'll mention here that I like how in HBO's Game of Thrones, they put Arya close enough to see Grey Wind killed, whereas in the book she never reaches the castle. Afterward, I include here post-mortem mentions of Grey Wind. They are rich in pack bond evidence and in rumors or implications of the pair warging in relation to their deaths. A Storm of Swords, Davos 5. First we get the mention of Grey Wind's head being sewn to Robb's body. I wonder if the desecration of all 3 bodies is to cement to us readers that the Freys are accursed. Either way, it's pretty clear warging imagery. I am not seeing the body, no, your kingliness, said Salador-san. Yet, in the city the lions prance and dance, the Red Wedding, the small folk are calling it. They swear Lord Frey had the boy's head hacked off, sewn to the head of his direwolf in its place, and nailed a crown about his ears. His lady mother was slain as well, and thrown naked in the river. A Storm of Swords, Bran 4. We also get 2 mentions each of Grey Wind by Jon and Bran. All are related to dreams. First, Bran dreams about their deaths through summer, he believes, and tries to deny it to himself. No, thought Bran, it is the Night Fort, and this is the end of the world. In the mountains, all he could think of was reaching the wall and finding the 3-eyed crow. But now that they were here, he was filled with fears. The dream he'd had, the dream Summer had had. No, he must not think about that dream. He had not even told the Reeds, though Mira at least seemed to sense that something was wrong. If he never talked about it, maybe he could forget that he ever dreamed it. And then it wouldn't have happened and Robb and Grey Wind would still be... A Storm of Swords, Jon 8. Next, Jon sees a vision of a dead Grey Wind in the crypts of Winterfell. I like to think that Robb's consciousness may have even made it into the crypts. Perhaps he's watching from there, waiting for his body to be entombed? It's an eerie dream and an eerie prospect. Up above he heard drums. They are feasting in the great hall, but I am not welcome there. I am no Stark, and this is not my place. His crutch slipped, and he fell to his knees. The crypts were growing darker. A light has gone out somewhere. Ygritte, he whispered. Forgive me, please. But it was only a direwolf, gray and ghastly, spotted with blood, his golden eyes shining sadly through the dark. A Dance with Dragons, Jon 1. Later, Jon has a wolf dream and learns Ghost's thoughts about the pack. Jon remembers from the dream that Ghost knows Grey Wind is dead. It's clear that the pack bond was quite strong. Jon pissed in the darkness, filling his chamber pot as the old bear's raven muttered complaints. The wolf dreams had been growing stronger, and he found himself remembering them even when awake. Ghost knows the Grey Wind is dead. Robb had died at the Twins, betrayed by men he'd believed his friends, and his wolf had perished with him. Bran and Rickon had been murdered too, beheaded at the behest of Theon Greyjoy, who had once been their Lord Father's ward. But if dreams did not lie, their dire wolves had escaped. At Queen's Crown, one had come out of the darkness to save Jon's life. Summer, it had to be. His fur was gray, and Shaggy Dog is black. He wondered if some part of his dead brothers lived on inside their wolves. A Dance with Dragons, Bran won. In the final quote of this essay, we see that Bran needs to remind Summer of his pack. I'll amend my prior statement. The pack bond is quite strong except when one of the pack is isolated beyond the wall. The other wolves made do with his leavings. The old male fed first, then the female, then the tail. They were his now. They were pack. No, the boy whispered. We have another pack. Lady's dead, and maybe Grey Wind too. But somewhere there's still Shaggy Dog and Nymeria and Ghost. Remember Ghost? We can hope that Summer will return from beyond the wall and their mutual telepathic connection will strengthen more. So that's it for Grey Wind and Robb's bond. In closing, Grey Wind will not be forgotten by his pack. Bran won't allow it. Nor will Jon and Ghost. With the remaining direwolves, we'll continue to study and build upon the direwolf themes explored extensively here with Grey Wind and Robb. Unfortunately, their fate is a prime example of the final theme, that bad things happen when the wolves are separated from their Starks. On the positive side of things, the magic that connects the remaining 4 wolves is strong, so there is hope that their fates will be nicer, despite what a cruel SOB our author is known to be. 4 remain, 3 plus 1 more, the White, who has no voice. We tackle Nymeria and Arya next. Shoutouts and attribution, as always, go to those who've gone before me, with some of the theories that I am probably subconsciously utilizing/mentioning or building upon here, especially Love Me Sexy Jesus and Rocky Rockington from Reddit, and Preston Jacobs. Thanks also to my family, including Lady Chrissy, the Saxy Bass Lass, and the Brushed Bombshell, who provided voiceover and art for this endeavor. Thanks to all the terrific artists who let me use their work on this YouTube video. This series and all my essays are available on my website, alivealivezero.home.blog. Check them out. If you enjoy this content, you can also consider supporting us on Patreon.